Nathan, welcome to Political Hope.
Hey Rishi, thank you so much for having me. And I know I know we've both been extremely busy over the last couple of years doing what I like to think on my part, and I know on your part is awesome work in California, and Hawaii, I think. So it's sad we haven't been able to get in the same place together, but I'm glad we've kept in touch and have shared our lessons and insights with each other.
I always feel I am in deep kinship no matter what when people have whiteboards and post-its and they're doing all that and then we're doing the same thing. We're in the same flow even if we're not physically near each other. We're doing the strategizing and the mapping and the it's happening. So let's jump into the first question. I think it always helps kind of give us a bunch of context. What does political hope mean to you, Nathan?
Sure. I like that you start with that question because I think it's something that we all have to consider. Political hope means to me that something better is possible in politics, that it doesn't have to be about isms, including tribalism. It doesn't have to be about political parties. Political parties, it's not necessarily bad that they exist, but they should be a means to an end and not an end in themselves. Um, and that end for me is for people to have more power over their own lives, for people to have more power to be more free in their lives. And freedom is not just political, although I do really subscribe to that definition of freedom. But freedom is also spiritual. It's mental. It's medical would sound weird, but it has to do with your health too. There's spiritual freedom. There's psychological freedom, and to just advocate for political freedom divorced from those things, divorced from having control and freedom over your health, your wealth, your well-being, your community, how you associate with other people, then it's not really complete freedom. Uh, what else? So political hope also means to me that that the political process is intelligible. I mean, a lot of times it seems like it's not, but it's something that we can learn. It's something we can teach. It's something that we can participate in. It's something we can enroll other people in. At least it was designed that way. So there's a lot more that people can do, and people have a lot more power than they think. And I think one thing you and I, and probably a lot of your listeners have in common is we're really committed to teaching people how to access and use that power they already have.
Yeah, I love that you bring that up because civic literacy is such a big. I feel, even I have to admit, I mean, I was a straight A student. I had a 4.4 GPA in high school. I don't even know how that's possible, Nathan. But at the same time, despite having a 4.4 AP government, AP economics, AP whatever, I didn't learn anything about how the government actually works. I didn't know what a city manager does. I don't know. I didn't know how citizens can even do a policy or create a policy or submit a proposal. We didn't learn any of that in school, like how to actually do those things, which is kind of amazing that you can be so smart in school, smart, academically, but not know how the government works.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. I mean, there's that classic distinction, right, of book smart versus street smart, and that does apply to politics. And case in point, I studied political science. I was not quite as high a performing student as you were. I did well, but
I
it
was, I was,
wasn't.
trust me, I was looking over at my neighbor's tests a lot, and I was.
Okay. Um, but I didn't learn a whole lot with my major that was directly applicable to real life. And right after getting out of college, I worked on my first campaign, and I absolutely learned more on that campaign, which was less than a year long, than I did in my 3.5 years of college in terms of how politics actually works. I'm thankful for my college experience, and I did have a good education, and I'm thankful to everyone who's a part of it. Family being supportive and great professors and all. And it was not complete in the sense of being actually to leave college and be able to use it right away. I think a lot of that has to be learned through direct experience.
Yeah, it's interesting that you said that you learn so much more, like I wouldn't say more, but you learn the relative aspects of civic engagement, when working on a campaign. And I feel there's kind of a nuance there, right? Because the past 10 years, there have been a lot, social media has kind of changed how people even do campaigning, right? And a lot of people think that they're like involved in politics when they're like posting on social media or they're part of a campaign and they're doing very superficial things a part of campaigns. Whereas I feel what you're talking about being involved in the campaign, there's a lot more, there's maybe more engagement that doesn't actually get championed, or maybe that's not something. So I'm curious, what is the differentiation for you? Like, what does it mean to participate in that way of campaigning in such a way that you're actually understanding civic literacy more versus just kind of parodying what's being, funneled down to people to share in
Yeah,
it.
sure. Well, a campaign fundamentally is a group of organization, a group or organization to support a person or policy or ballot initiative um, to win an election. And we can there are other contexts for the word campaign, like an email campaign
Right.
on MailChimp, but in the political context, just someone declaring that they're running for office does not necessarily make it a campaign. To
Mm.
me, a campaign, there are fairly high standards of what it means, and I think a lot more people could do it, but a lot of the people who claim to be running for office are kind of doing it in a superficial way. So here's what I would say it means to be campaigning. It means one, that you are actively reaching out to voters. That's the number one thing. Everyone everyone really does know in their gut, but not always identifies the fact that, in order to win an election, you have to get enough votes.
Mhm.
Usually it's 50% plus one, but that's not always the case depending on the type of election. And there are a lot of distinctions in politics and campaigns, like the fact that you should not just target getting one more vote than you need. You should target getting 3% more votes than you need. But anyway, that's the main thing, is actively talking to voters. And another distinction within that is it should not just be about talking to voters who already agree with you. That's not campaigning. That's preaching to a crowd. That's a vanity campaign. Um, Really, campaigning does mean getting those people out to vote, but it also means talking to people who are not already self-identified as voting for you or your party or your policy or your platform, um, and actively persuading people. It also means, and this does depend on what you're running for and where. You don't necessarily always have to raise money, or not necessarily a lot. But for the most part, if you're running for office, you need to be able to raise money. I'll sum all that up by saying if you're running for office, there are three main things you need to vote for. Ask for. You need to ask for people's vote.
Mhm.
You need to ask for people's time as volunteers,
Mm.
and you need to ask for people's money in terms of donations. Sometimes you can get all three you can ask one person for all three of those things.
Mhm.
Everyone who's going to donate to you, if they do live in that district, I would hope they're voting for you. Everyone who's going to volunteer for you, again, I would hope they're voting for you.
Mhm.
Everyone who's voting for you can be a volunteer and or a donor.
Mhm.
And a campaign that is not asking or is not prepared to ask for those things, I'm not saying that they shouldn't run for office, but I'm saying they should do some groundwork. And it's not something to rush. It's not something to treat like a rat race, or to treat like a vanity competition. It's something to really take seriously and respect as part of the American political process, and to respect our voters, our potential constituents, and see, it's if you really want to run for office, that means you want to represent people. And to represent people, you have to be listening to them and hearing their concerns and shaping, your policies and your positions accordingly. And a lot of candidates um, don't do that. So being on social media is not in itself a campaign. Having a website is not in itself a campaign. Those things help.
Mhm.
But alone in a vacuum, those are not a campaign.
That's beautiful. I love that you broke it down in those different ways. I also feel it's incredibly important right now how, to recognize how few people vote, with especially when you talk about local stuff. And that, I just can't help but look at the numbers. I'm such a numbers person. You would never guess, but I'm like really love studying numbers. And when you have such a low percentage of citizens voting, especially the local. I want to just really focus on the local because we just had a presidential election and people usually everybody goes like turns on for the elections, right? For the presidential ones, but like we're talking about like local stuff, state stuff, proposition stuff, all these different things. Um, it's weird because when you have such a low voting percentage of citizens voting, that means that people are not reaching out to a huge block of people who don't vote. So like to me, I can't help but recognize the opportunity there. But what from your, I mean, because you've been involved in some different ways, from volunteering and many even as when you're in college, you're involved also in politics as well. Why do you think people don't vote locally, and how could they be inspired to vote?
Yeah, there are a lot of reasons why people don't vote. I think one of the main ones that I hear is they don't think it makes a difference. They don't think it makes an impact, that it's a drop in the bucket. And I do understand why people would think that, certainly on a high level, like a national level election. But one of the paradoxes that works in our favor in politics is the higher up an elected official is, and I don't mean higher like a hierarchy, like they're above you, they're better than you. What I mean is just in terms of the sheer amount of territory that they have influence over and how many people they impact, like a president paradoxically, the less direct impact they have on your everyday lives. The corollary of that is the closer they are to you, school board, city council, mayor, water commissioner, anything else at a local or county level, they might have less total power over less total people, but their impact is magnified. So proportionately, the impact of local elected offices is higher on people's everyday lives. Now, that also means that our impact, so here's where I'm getting back to your question. Our impact as voters or as activists or as organizers for that matter goes the same way. The same amount of work, whether it's a vote or knocking on doors or donating money, the same amount of work applied to, let's say, a city council campaign versus a presidential campaign proportionately has way more impact on the outcome of a local election than on a national election. And I haven't looked at all the numbers recently from the last election, but a lot of campaigns, a lot of elections come down to at a local level, sometimes tens or dozens of votes. At a state assembly or in other states besides California, state house level or even congressional level, sometimes campaigns are winning or losing with a matter of hundreds of votes. Case in point, Michelle Steele I don't remember the number of her district right now, but in Orange County, uh, only lost by a few hundred votes. And for that matter, when she and a bunch of other Republicans flipped some congressional districts in California in 2020 and 2022, well, they did win, but they only won by also in most cases a few hundred votes. So typically like within 1 percentage point. And a lot of times when a district gets flipped by any political party, it's usually not a dramatic landslide. It's usually less than 1% and no more than 5% difference in votes. Um, so one thing to point to is your vote does matter, and the more local of a campaign we're talking about, the more it matters. Another thing to point to is a lot of people just don't understand the how to vote, the method of how to vote is constantly changing. Or maybe that's an exaggeration. It often changes. And that can be a little bit hard to navigate and keep track of for people. So I really appreciate that there are a lot of organizations out there that without getting into the politics of what's the right way to vote or not, the fact is they're communicating to people, here's how you vote, here's when you vote, here's where you vote. that's really important for any campaign. That's called vote planning, is actually talking through with people. Okay, great. Thank you for your support. Thanks for agreeing to vote and to vote for us. Now let's talk about how, when, and where you're going to vote and how to make it easiest for you. So I would say that those are the two main reasons more people don't vote. There's a really good book that I would recommend to all listeners, which is called Mobilizing Inclusion. I don't remember the names of the authors right now, but I'm pretty sure it's the only book of that title, and it's on Amazon. And that's specifically about voter contact efforts in California.
Hmm.
And then another really good book, and this one has no ideological leanings whatsoever. It's straight up science, is Get Out the Vote by Gerber and Green, and it's in its fifth or sixth edition. Incredible, two incredible books that really help understand why people do or don't vote.
Whoa, I love that. That's really good. I mean, I feel the nuance with this is it's so potent. I feel once again, going back to what you said, that the outsized impact of voting locally is so powerful. Especially when it comes to affecting your everyday life. Yet the disconnection with our involvement. I mean, I can't help but recognize, when I go to the city hall meetings, right, where I live. And this is the same thing when I was in Hawaii going to meetings, and even when I was in LA going to meetings. And for some reason, Nathan, I have like this sick what's it called? Like, what is what's that? Sado sadistic. Yeah,
Sadomasochist?
that thing, right? Like I love to go to these bureaucratic meetings, right? These city hall meetings. I don't know why. I'm like
Yeah,
love to go to them. And I just recognize like there's very rarely people our age, right? I'm gonna lump us into the same age, even though I got some white hairs here. But we're, people in our age, 20s, 30s, 40s, that are like smart, intelligent, creative, problem solvers, entrepreneurs, whatever you want to call it. We're not there. We're not in those meetings. We're not we're not giving public comments. We're not like giving any presentations. It's usually the same people that are coming and showing up. And when people do show up, they're just really angry or upset,
yeah,
and they're making public comment about being upset about what's happening or just vilifying whoever's sitting there. But very rarely are there people like us who are compassionate, empathetic, problem solvers. So I think like that's kind of weird too, right? That there's like what's happening there? Like why aren't people who are entrepreneurial and who are creative and who are problem solvers, who are engineers and build. I mean, I don't know, I can go on and on, but where are they at the
yeah.
public meetings?
Well, I think that a lot of the challenges in politics are limiting beliefs that are not necessarily fact. And I'm not saying that what you just shared is an observation of a pretty objective problem. But I think what you're pointing to is a lot of people out there have limiting beliefs about the political process. But it really comes down to the same principles, whether it's why don't more people vote? Why don't more people run for office, especially at a local level? Why don't more people engage with their local government and attend these meetings? It's because they don't know how. They don't think it's going to make an impact. They think it's scarier and more complicated than it actually is. And I'm not gonna say it's always easy or it's always fun, but it's more easy and more fun than people think. And a lot of it, besides being limiting beliefs, there's also a lot of self-fulfilling prophecies of if we don't participate in government meetings, well, of course they're going to be boring because they're going to be the terms and the agenda items and everything are going to be set by the same people all the time. But anyone who watches the Los Angeles City Council meetings, at least the public comment sections, they're not necessarily always flowery and friendly, but they're never boring. And there are people who show up over and over again, but there are also a lot of people. There are also, a consistent influx of new people. So I think that one of I don't want to say responsibilities, but opportunities for people who are in leadership roles or organizers, or who have any kind of influence or reach to large numbers of people is to help demystify that process. And something I hope we'll be able to talk about today is something called the Magellan Project, which is meant to do that for people, which is meant to help people access and understand and interact with their local governments. But yeah, to bring it back to the general principles, it's up to those of us who are already leading, mobilizing, influencing people, not just to get people to do things, because that makes it kind of manipulative and Machiavellian, but to empower people to do things, give them tools, resources, training, support. So that's how I would address that. Uh, just making it more accessible and giving people an opportunity to do these things with other people.
Mhm.
Making it easy and making it a function of team or community is always going to be more effective than, hey, this is really hard and it really sucks, but you have to do it because it's your duty.
Mhm. I don't know if that's ever worked for anybody.
No,
Uh,
no, it really hasn't.
Yeah, and it reminds me too of how, like, in traditional viewpoints, I mean, especially I come from a community in India that still, is a farming village and has their own, panchayat, right? Like they have their own political process because it is a small town and there's farmers and there's people, there's so they deal with a lot of their political issues outside of the existing government structures, the greater
Right.
ones. And they come around the tree, like they gather around the mother tree in the community, and then they discuss their problems. They problem solve as a community together. And the city hall is supposed to be that space. The county, whatever place is supposed to be that place. Yet there isn't a space for people to come and just gather and see each other. Like it's not that. There's like a very front facing, very imperial kind of like British magistrate kind of echoes of that, right? Where like we're not meeting in a circle. We're meeting like it's very,
Interesting.
yeah. I wonder if that limits the ability for people to come together first before dealing with the rules and the challenges.
I think to an extent it does, but that there's something we can do about it. Um, and maybe it's easy for me to say. So I grew up in New England, and for those of you from outside of New England, a lot of people don't know that it's a very specific thing. New England is the six northeasternmost states: Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island. And I live in LA now, but we have a very long tradition in New England of what's called the town meeting or town hall meeting. It's not the same as a city council meeting because it's open to everybody and everyone's deliberating and discussing. And to this day, it's still common that elected officials or candidates will hold these style of meetings where they present all their policies and they actually not necessarily debate but deliberate about it, talk about it. And as a result of this long tradition, architecturally, we do have spaces for this. Like it's very common in New England towns to find an outdoor amphitheater, or if not, a city council chamber with a lot of seating. Now, say you don't have that in your community. Well, I don't know if it's not necessarily going to be a quick fix. We can't snap our fingers and then a new amphitheater shows up. But what we can do is we can provide some spaces for it. Churches, schools, parks. It can happen organically. It can happen through voluntary association and organizing. So that may be my recommendation to people in places where you don't feel like there's something already available or built in, is you don't need to have it the way other places have it. Ask people if they'll host it at their houses. Do something outdoors in a park on a nice day. Ask a church with a function hall. You don't have to be members of that church or that denomination or anything. Some churches love just giving a space to people. Libraries, a lot of libraries have meeting spaces you can rent. American Legion or Elks Lodge or Moose Lodge or these other civic organizations.
Boy Scout Hall.
Possibly the thing with Boy Scouts is they tend not to own the property that they do their meetings in, so they might not necessarily have say over it. A lot of times it's through a church,
Uh,
or another civic or religious or fraternal associated group. But yeah, there are fallbacks. There are ways to do it, but we might have to make it happen on our own.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I'm glad that you're bringing that up because even myself, I've been kind of orienting citizen assemblies in such a way to kind of reimagine how they can also be there can also be aspects of volunteerism embedded in the citizen assembly. Like we can all do the town hall thing And we can also pick up garbage, or we can plant native trees, or we can weed, fire fuel plants. And that could be a part of the town hall process, is actually doing something all as a community together as well, and connecting the volunteering with the civic engagement.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one thing that more organizations, including political parties, including, grassroots issue-focused groups, that they can and should do is compile volunteer opportunities in their cities and counties and help refer people to them.
Mhm,
And one reason why I think that that's a good idea is after an election there's for a lot of political organizations there's this sense of a downtime, and I get it, and we need a break, and we can't be doing politics 24/7. It can be taxing, no pun intended, but it can be like taxing on our energy and our time. So we need breaks, but at the same time there's not really such a thing as downtime in politics. There's no such thing as an off year. I mean, there might be an off year from elections, but politics is always happening. And if you don't take an interest in politics, it will take an interest in you. So what I want to see and what I'm actively working to create is for there to be a new norm and a higher standard of civic engagement where political parties don't just operate to get their people elected short term, but where they actually do activism between election cycles to actually solve problems in measurable, tangible ways. Wouldn't it be amazing? And I pose this question somewhat rhetorically, but I do pose this question to you and to all your listeners. Wouldn't it be amazing if every political organization, campaign, political party was doing something tangible to help resolve the problems that they're pointing to? Wouldn't it be amazing if instead of complaining about it, they were doing something about it? Wouldn't it be amazing if we can't find something specific that we can do that's within our own power, then maybe we should not be investing energy or attention to that issue. Maybe we should focus on an issue that we can do something about. Because when a political group focuses people's attention on something big, scary, and amoebic and like hard to wrap our heads around, that's just going to make people apathetic. I have a saying that I teach in my trainings that awareness minus action equals apathy.
mhm. Wow. Wait, say that again?
Awareness minus action equals apathy, or awareness without action leads to apathy. If people get aware of an issue or a problem, you get them mad about it or you get them sad about it,
Mhm,
but there's no way for them to take an action about it. And by the way, that's the responsibility of the people raising the awareness, is to give them way to take an action. Then people are just going to have more thoughts in their head, but there are a lot of other thoughts in people's heads. We live in the 21st century and there's constant competition for our energy, our focus, our attention, our commitment. We're not going to cut through that noise and change people's behaviors at any level if we're just adding to the noise.
I love that. That's a big, big point, because even from a physiological standpoint, our nervous system, we subconsciously is always processing threat versus safety versus, food, shelter, water, community, like all these different things are being processed all the time. And if you're looking at TikTok or you're on Instagram or Facebook, you're now adding to that nervous system thing. So actually, from a physiological standpoint, that affects your body's ability to, your immune system, to your blood, your heart, and your cardiovascular system is being
Yeah.
impacted by your awareness of things not being addressed. And if you don't address those things, it does create the apathy, but it creates this like negative feedback loop, which makes the problem worse. It keeps getting worse, and you're more aware of it being worse, but you don't know what to do to make it better, and you just keep looping. And then you talk to other people, hey, is that, and then people just commiserate around trauma bond, around the awareness of the problem, but there's no action happening to address the problem. So
Yeah.
the apathy is going, oh my God, it's like I can totally see the feedback loops. Like, you know?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Awareness and apathy and anxiety about the a political problem or situation, they're self-reinforcing. The more apathetic you are, but the more people keep trying to get your attention to just get you to know about it and care about it, the more anxious you're going to be. And the more anxious you're going to be, the less you're going to be able to do because it's analysis paralysis. Referring back to an earlier idea, it's our it's our job as leaders, organizers, and for those who are involved in political parties, organizations too, to demystify the political process for people. So, at the risk of sounding a little bit crass, I want to invite anyone who your organization or your group's goal is to inform people or educate people or raise awareness. I want to invite people to reevaluate that. There's nothing wrong with that goal, but if raising awareness is the top goal of an organization, the problem with that is you're never going to know if you've done it. You can't measure units of awareness. And then it's going to make it hard to raise money. It's going to make it hard to recruit volunteers because it's always going to be unclear of what are your measures of success. We can't measure everything, but there's some things we can, which is why I like to find things to measure. How many pounds of trash did you clean up from your community? How many bowls of soup did you serve? How many hours did you help out at like the LA Dream Center is one of the big hubs for the fire response right now? How many hours did you spend there? Or, how many doors did you knock? How many voters did you talk to? How many said, yes, I will vote for you? How many said, maybe, let me get back to you. I need to do my research. There are a lot of things we can measure. So I think we should focus on those.
I love that too. It goes back to, I'm in the California Donut Economics Coalition, so I get to talk to a lot of amazing economists all the time that are kind of stretching the bounds of how we even practice economics and study economics. And it goes back to saying that we pay attention to what we measure. And if we're just constantly measuring the awareness of the problem, we're not really then measuring the solution to the problem. We're like constantly just measuring the problem, and then that's the problem continues to grow, right? Because we're measuring that. But if we're measuring the actual solutions or the actions that will result in the mitigation of those problems, then that also changes the direction of also what we value as well. Which obviously goes back to, like, disaster capitalism versus disaster collectivism, and then we can get to all these different stories. But pin down the side, I want to go back to something you shared. One, I want to share your work. I would love for you to share your work with the Leadership Institute and how that kind of informs what you're doing now. Like, how is that kind of supporting you in the culmination of your career and your mission in this space with the Leadership Institute? And I also want you to go back to the Magellan process and share that too.
Sure. Yeah, I'll definitely touch on the Leadership Institute. I would say outside of any specific organizations or titles, I would say my vocation is training people on leadership, activism, and running for office, or more broadly, the political process and where it overlaps with those three things. And the Leadership Institute is, while I'm not here representing the Leadership Institute, I am proud of my work there and the work that we do. And it is one of the main vehicles that I've worked with and through. Uh, and there are things that are easier to do when we have organizational support, but there are also things that people can do in their private lives voluntarily without organizational support. Not all of it involves money. Um, what I do at the Leadership Institute is mainly training. It's training people on how a lot of it is the how. A lot of people have heard for years what they should do, but not how to do it.
Hmm.
And also sometimes it's presented outside of the context of why. So I like to refer back to Simon Sinek and his Start with Why TED Talk and book, that if you're disconnected from the why, then the what and how are not going to matter. But if people don't know specifically what they should be doing that has the most impact and they don't know how to do it, well, that's another example of how awareness without action leads to apathy, because they might know that they should be doing something, but duty and should do something is not what motivates people. So training is in this context is about equipping people with tools, teaching them how to use specific tools, technology, strategy, tactics, mindsets. I actually prefer mindsets over strategy and tactics. Uh, for example, there are some things that people think happen randomly, but that there's a process to doing it. So, say you want to recruit volunteers for something, for any cause, anything that you want to increase people power for. A lot of people assume that that if people don't volunteer for something, it's because they're not interested. Uh, and the problem with that assumption is it assumes that people are have fixed interests, that they're always interested in certain things that they'll never be that they're never going to stop being interested in that, or they were never not interested in that. It assumes interest is very static and fixed. But what I want people to see is that interest is something that can be sparked or generated, and like a flame that can be fueled and fanned. So there's something that I call the bacon method, which has nothing to do with actual bacon that you eat. It's just about having something you can remember, which is build, activate, connect, organize, nurture.
Nice.
And a little bit more specifically, build lists of everyone who could possibly be involved. Activate means to follow up one-on-one personally with each individual person and get specific people to take specific actions.
Mm,
Connect is connect people to each other. So now we've connected one-on-one and we have what's called a dyad, and it's a two-dimensional relationship because let's say I'm a campaign volunteer coordinator. I can't and should not maintain a bunch of like dozens of one-on-one conversations. What I should be doing is building a team out of them. Uh, Organize is about a few things. It's about putting people in roles, in responsibilities. And a good way to do that is imagine a matrix where the vertical is let's say a specific responsibility, and the horizontal is a geographical area.
mm,
So you can put someone in charge of specific responsibility for specific geographical area. The LA City door knocking captain, the Santa Monica City phone banking captain, the Pasadena volunteer activities coordinator. That's just one way that you can put people in roles, give them a title, get them involved.
mhm,
And the last one, nurture, is about nurturing those relationships long term and not treating it like a short-term rat race of this is all about just winning this campaign so the candidate can build their resume and their clout. It should be about building something bigger, building maybe it's a political party, maybe it's a movement, but for me, it's always about something bigger than an individual candidate. And if it's not, then I'm not really interested in supporting that candidate.
mhm,
And organizations that follow this method will see that whether you win or lose in the short term, like an individual
mhm.
campaign and an individual election cycle, you're still building something over the long term.
Totally. I really love this the idea of having nurture in it too because I feel there's a special nuance with that because it's one of those things that can't be it can't be it can't be a checkbox. It's actually got to be like a culture of nurturing because you can see how like that can also become like a checkbox or like we gave everybody this thing that now you're nurtured, but I think having a culture of nurturing when if people are doing all of these things within whether it's a campaign or an organization or whatever, it creates a culture that kind of embodies what could be hopeful, politically hopeful, I guess, if you want to go back to what we started at. But really, it's like nurturing, I mean, goes back to like, you brought up churches, and I go back to like my heritage, how when you make sure everybody's fed well, when you make sure everybody's really safe and everybody's feeling heard and feeling taken care of, and it feels like they have an opportunity to be in their mastery, right? To actually be able to share their mastery or share their gifts. It's amazing like how people show up. Like you don't have to even tell people what to do anymore. They just do it really well.
Yeah.
And so I feel there's a nuance there that isn't really, I don't see it that much in the political spaces, but I wonder if that was activated more, what would happen actually if people do feel more nurtured and nourished when they are showing up to care about either a candidate or some sort of bill or something that's going to really support the community.
Yeah, humans are wired for community and connection. We do need solitude and alone time, but we're more likely to lose our minds if we go too long without community than if we go too long without solitude.
Yep.
And that's hardwired in us for as long as we've existed, and from the time that we started to exist as humans, um, we've existed as a function of community.
Mhm.
That's not an argument for people to be like collectivist and to not live their own lives and to think that they were just born to serve, to like live uh, for the sole sake of serving others. I mean, there could be a way to nobly phrase that, but what it does show is that we do live in as a function of community. Um, so a good campaign, cause, or organization knows that and consciously connects with that need. Look at anything that people ever get passionate about. Look at anything that people ever get fanatical about, and not necessarily fanatical like dangerous or extremist necessarily, but really, really passionate about. And for some people, it's their job or their vocation. For some people, it's sports. For some people, it's religion. For some people, it's dangerous or negative things that fill a void, but fundamentally, everyone is looking for, on some level, for cause, community, and connection. And the in the 21st century, people are more separate from that than ever. And we're seeing the impact. We're seeing the impact on the political discourse and on people's mental health. And people are just moving in too many directions and trying to be too many different things for everybody. And some of what is being offered as community is a really superficial kind of community, like social media. So one of the other things that we as political leaders, activists, organizers can and should be doing is helping people find their why and helping reconnect them to it. Which is why I don't like to approach volunteer recruitment, and I do that. I do volunteer recruitment, and recruitment in itself is a morally neutral thing. It's not inherently good or bad. But I don't like to approach volunteer recruitment as get people to do stuff and it's just dividing and conquering the labor and it's getting people to do stuff for free. If I can't find a way that getting someone to volunteer for me is advancing their interests,
Mhm.
of course it's advancing mine for whatever cause I'm working for. But if it's not advancing theirs, then I don't even see it as a good fit. I know that they're more likely to burn out. I know that they're not gonna be self-motivated by it. I know that if they do help out at all, if it's not advancing their values and interests, then it's gonna be coming from a place of guilt or
Mhm.
shame or scarcity or duty.
Mhm.
Those are not high noble values for me. Um, you also made me think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Mhm.
And I'm not going to say necessarily that volunteering on a campaign uh, addresses one's hierarchy of needs, but what I can say is, again, we should be looking for ways that someone's political involvement advances their interests.
Mhm.
And a good way to get people to think in those terms is, rather than throwing a bunch of political issues at people and hoping they agree with you, with us, what we should be doing is look for, how do the issues and policies affect them? What is the impact on them? On what does them mean? Well, their lives, their families, their children, their health, their wallet. And then corollary of that is, what impact can they have on it?
Mhm.
Or how can they do something that has an impact on it, even if it's a small impact?
Mhm.
And if we can't answer those questions, it's going to be hard to enroll people,
Mhm.
and it's going to be more likely that a campaign resorts to like manipulation or pressure tactics if they're not coming from a place of cause and alignment with cause and building of community. Does that make sense?
Totally. Yeah, I
That's
mean,
what you made me think of.
It also makes me think about how much, I mean, like this particular like campaign election cycle featured, billions of dollars being spent in campaign financing, and a lot of it went to consultants, right? Who, some of them I don't even know what they did with that money. And then the other side of it was a lot of the marketing was around disparaging the other candidate or disparaging the other proposition rather than offering invitations to connect, like exactly what you're saying. Like it wasn't being that money wasn't invested towards projects or connecting the community with each other or whatever. And it could have been used that way. It actually, when you were speaking, I actually wrote down a note about project-based campaigning or project-based campaign financing and actually getting like projects funded by a campaign or maybe multiple campaigns funding a project, whether it's like eco restoration project or it's building a food forest for the community or some watershed cleaning or something like that. That'd be really interesting for that to be a way to kind of raise money for a campaign. But anyways, as we're kind of coming closer to the close of this conversation, but I think this is the beginning of many, Nathan. I hope that you know that you can use this channel as well for yourself to be able to kind of also share more of these ideas as you're doing this work in the world and as the different parameters change, politically in our country and around the world. How can we
Yes.
continue to have this conversation? Please keep using this, make sure you come back and if there's any insights or whatever you're learning. But I do want to open up the portal for you to share. What do you feel? What could happen? Like what are some of the positive things that could happen? What are the protopian, pronoic things that could happen if your work starts to actually really do what it's supposed to do? Like if what you care about, what you're working on, and that starts to actually turn into action and turn into the right mobilization. What do you imagine happening in the next year or several years? What can happen?
What can happen is a civic renaissance, is a Tocquevillian, resurgence of people working together voluntarily at a community level. And I was very influenced in that view. I was very influenced by a lot of different influences that you normally wouldn't combine together in one sentence, but here it goes. Here are a few of them. One is Boy Scouts, where if you are in Boy Scouts and you're at a point where you're looking to get what's called Eagle rank, that's the highest thing in Boy Scouts, you have to do a project.
Hmm.
And it's a real world, real life project where you have to propose it and organize it and get it approved, get funding for it, raise money, get materials donated as well, get volunteers. And it's meant to be so well run that the person running it is not really supposed to do the manual labor. They're supposed to get enough other people to do it. So that's a great model that I wish was not limited to scouting, is I think what they're called now. Um, I wish it was not limited to that, and it doesn't have to be. That can be done through other
Hmm.
fraternal, civic, volunteer organizations, including political parties. They could offer a scholarship or a grant to people who propose a great community project. So that's one way. I've also been very influenced by Alexis de Tocqueville, but I don't really have a suggested course of action on how to emulate Alexis de Tocqueville. There is one thing that I've been working on for a few years, and I really want to get back to this year and take beyond California and make it a national effort. Is something I call the Magellan Project. Do you mind if I get into that a little bit? Um, so the Magellan Project is named after. So I actually have the Portuguese flag behind me. The Magellan Project is named after Ferdinand Magellan, who planned the trip, the navigation, the financing, the ships, the everything that made the first circumnavigation around the world. And why is that relevant to today? Well, I like to think of the Magellan Project as circumnavigating American civics and local politics. More specifically, that means creating a map, of a complete picture of how do people actually engage in American civics and local politics. So I'm going to get more and more specific here. And an answer to that question is, well, like we were talking about earlier, local government meetings, city councils, school board, county supervisors. If we're not involved with those, then we really have no say on what happens on a local level. and it's much easier than people think. So the biggest component of the Magellan Project is very specifically this. It's compiling for every city in America or every municipality in America, city, town, township, whatever they're called, compiling the specific schedules and instructions for participating in those city council meetings. Like, how do you show up? Do you make public comment in person or by Zoom or by email? Preferably in person. That is the most effective. And what is the actual schedule? How often do they meet? And one might think people could just go to their city's website to find that out. And that's a very romanticist thing to say. That assumes that city websites are easy to find and easy to navigate. And they're really not. I mean, I have I really believe in working with government, but I also think that, it's inherently uh, averse to innovation and clarity and transparency. So the Magellan Project is about compiling that all in a centralized, easily accessible place, centralized, digital, free to access. And I've done it for, well, not just me, but I and volunteers and interns and activists throughout California have been compiling this for the last few years. And what we now have is for all 480 cities in California, the schedules and city and meeting and participation instructions for how they meet. Now, if we can do that for California, we can do that for any state because most states don't have as many cities as California, and the few that have more, well, the figuring out of how to do it is already done.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm going to share a resource verbally, and I don't know if you have. I think you have show notes if you
Mhm.
want to
I
share
do.
anything in
I will. I
writing.
will.
That let me just double check that this is accurate. It should be tinyurl.com/Magellan America. Let me just test that real quick. And yeah, that is it. What that shows is the what is available to view right now, available to the public of what's been compiled for California, just to
Nice.
show to share as an example.
Nice.
Because my dream with this is to work with volunteers from across the country to do this for every state, to compile the schedules and meeting instructions for not just city council, but your county governments,
Right.
school boards, and other local government entities, so that there's one easy go-to resource for people to participate and engage with their local government. This is something that it's action oriented. It's easy to do. It's time consuming, but it's easy.
Yeah.
It's simple in concept. It's something that benefits everybody, regardless of ideology or affiliation or political party. And it's something that is absolutely in line with founding American values of government being accessible and transparent to the people, and also modern
Mhm.
values of more people, being represented and having a voice and making their voice heard.
Mhm.
So it kind of brings together some traditional and modern ideas about what government is for and how it should work and how we should engage with it.
I love
So
that.
that link is where people can access what's already been done and where they can see an example so that anyone listening who can help me build this for your state uh, has something to start with and I can give contact information or something so people can reach out. But this is a great time. 2025 is a great time to be doing this when the whole country is not totally absorbed in an election,
Yep.
and it's something that's going to be valuable for years to come.
I love this, Nathan. I'm so glad that you're opening this portal up because I know when we first connected several years ago, right? We this was something that you were compiling. I remember you were compiling this list, and now it's. I love that it's now it's even has the name Magellan. It's like so appropriate to have like a circumnavigator of the world. Kind of connected to the metaphor is really potent too, because there's a lot of courage required to lean into this space where, nobody people usually don't want to lean into that space. Like it's a scary territory of creating the bridge to, the civic engagement and local municipal engagement. And that being said, it's funny, as you know, a few years ago, I was also working on we were doing a tech project around building democracy or, reimagining how we can interface with local government. And one of my partners on that he's, he's an amazing full stack developer. Like, he's also been like hired by the military to do really cool projects also with them, and he's an amazing programmer. He just reached out to me a couple weeks ago actually and was like, "Hey, look what I've been." He's like, "I never stopped working on what we were talking about," and he sent me some stuff about creating the digital interface that doesn't need Apple Play Store, or it doesn't need to be. It's not an app. It's actually a way that you can just enter through it through just your like through your phone's web interface, and it actually can give you what you're talking about. Like you put the Magellan into there. But what we're also imagining is the public being able to add comments to what's happening at the city meetings into that space so people can reference it later. And even public officials can reference it later if people are sharing information or content that's relevant. Usually, those public meetings, there's no place to share resources and information. So we want to create like a commons for the municipal spaces as well.
Yeah, it's not that at city meetings, it's not that there's no place for it. It's that, I mean, that might be the case in some places, but I think it's more of an issue that people don't know where that place for it is and they don't know how to access it. But there's nothing wrong, for example, with people who speak at a city council meeting referring people to a particular resource or event. You have to be appropriate and follow the rules and make it about a specific agenda item, let's say. But that doesn't mean you can't say like, well, we have a problem with all the trash in the streets, and City Council Member Smith, we want you to do something about it. In the meantime, we're planning a cleanup this Saturday. We want to invite all of you City Council members to join us. And this is open to everybody. Go to tinyurl.com/, blah 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 blah, for to sign up. So you get all the details. You meet us at this cross street. Bring work gloves, bring water bottles, whatever it is. You can give people action items in a city council meeting. You
Totally.
can give people action items in any forum. That's a really important distinction in our work, and where what we do overlaps is give people calls to action, clear, simple calls to action. And one more quick thought is that, going back to the idea of demystifying the political process, it's really important that we take as many steps out of the way as possible. When someone has great like tech or data knowledge and something like that and can make software to make things easier for people, that's super important. And I really appreciate when people do that. And I don't want anyone to think that you need you need to learn a really hard, complex new skill set in order to engage in politics. Would it be beneficial if you did? Sure. Like it's all a skill that can be learned. Just like Dale Carnegie said in his book, like social skills, communication stuff, it can all be learned. And you don't need, here's what one of the notes I'd like to leave off on is you don't need more knowledge. You don't need more experience. You don't need more information. Knowledge is not power, at least not knowledge on its own.
Mhm.
You know what is power? Action. Action is power. The knowledge matters because you need to take action for something or for a reason. It's not just flash in the pan. It's not just special effects. Knowledge without action leads to apathy, and action without knowledge is just superficial. So we need to act on our knowledge and not just spread more information, but spread more actions.
I love that. That's perfect. Act on our knowledge. Yeah, and actually, even when you act on your knowledge and you mess up, you learn from that too. So, but you don't learn from not doing any action. And the failure sometimes also helps us learn, and we build on that too. We don't have
You
any
miss
great.
you miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Literally, literally. And people always go like, "How do you do all the things you do?" And I'm like, I'm acting on my knowledge." Like, how do I can't not act on when I'm learning stuff. But thank you, Nathan. I really appreciate you. Thanks for sharing so much on this message. And yeah, do you feel complete?
Yeah, I'd just like to leave off on, can I share a link for where people can interact with me more?
Of course.
Um, I have a link tree where I'm going to be posting things like how to volunteer with the Magellan Project. There's a link to the LA County calendar of all the city council meetings. There are a lot of resources there, and I'm going to add more. The way you find that is linktr.ee/nfatal. So it's linktr dot slash n and my last name Fatal. And all of those links there are to be able to take some kind of action, to learn a skill, to sign up to volunteer for something. And I've been very inspired by the way the massive upswelling of mutual aid and voluntary action happening here in LA County.
Mhm.
And I would, if we can do it in LA after this massive disaster, natural but influenced by bad human decisions, if we can act on that after what's been happening and with all the distraction and everything that's going on, then I think that people can do that anywhere in America. So look to what's happening in LA and anywhere else where challenging things are happening, and look at it through a lens of, what is there to learn from this and what actions can we take about it? America is an awesome country, and the most awesome thing about it is that, we look out for each other and our neighbors, that we have a bias towards action, a good kind of bias. There are a lot of bad kinds, but that's one of the good ones. And that there's a lot more in our power than we think.
Yeah.
So action is power. Look for what actions you can take, sign up for local organizations, and and if there's something that someone thinks is too hard or they don't know how to do, look for resources on how to do it. I, there are books, there are YouTube videos, there's the Leadership Institute. I'm a resource, and it's been a great journey to realize that politics can be learned.